Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Peregrine with the Museum of Life and Science in Durham, North Carolina. We are so excited to host our special guest, who I will introduce properly in just a moment. And we're excited to celebrate International Women's Day today. This program is made possible in part by the Aztec If Then project grant for more equitable gender representation in STEM institutions like the museum. Be sure to check out the temporary exhibit in the lab on the second floor of the museum in the coming days, which will feature some really amazing interviews and other stuff with some of our favorite women STEM professionals in the area and beyond. I hope that all of you will welcome me in join me in welcoming our special guest today. This is Jennifer Stancil. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everyone.
For more than 20 years, Jen has led educational organizations, including the Girls Math and Science Partnership at the Carnegie Science Center. She's created impactful media with PBS and WQED, including her own Emmy Award-winning TV show, IQ Smart Parent. She has helped open up museums, including Marble's Children's Museum in Raleigh. She's also advised on the Women and Girls Council formed by the Obama White House. Today, she's the founder of the Hello Studios, chair of the board of directors for the National Girls Collaborative Project, and director at the National Math and Science Initiative. I'll go ahead and put a link to her website in the chat so you can learn more about her. I think that's a pretty concise list of your accomplishments, Jen. I think we can go on.
It's so great to be here, Peregrine. Thank you so much. This is really an anniversary in so many ways, because as you pull up my slides, you'll see I was lucky enough to present at the Museum of Life and Sciences at their International Women's Day last year. And we felt so strongly about updating that content in light of all that has transpired in the last year. So I'm just so thankful to the Museum of Life and Science. I want to give a shout out to all of my friends out there from the National Girls Collaborative Project, who they're watching us live and online as well. And to those of you, my colleagues and friends, and those teachers at NIMSI, the National Math and Science Institute, where I'm Director of Development. It's awesome to have all of you. We're excited to really talk today about girls and STEM, and particularly I wanted to follow up my speech from last year and talk about affinity to action. So I'm going to have Peregrine pull up the slides and we'll begin there.
Sure.
Terrific. Know that we are going to be really excited to answer any questions that you have at the end. And so we're just, feel free to type them in the chat now, etc. But we will have plenty of time to discuss at the end.
Sure. And before I hand this over to you properly and call up those slides, I did want to see if maybe we could hear from some viewers out there to kind of reflect on kind of one of our central questions for the day, which is, why do we observe International Women's Day? Or indeed, why do we celebrate March as Women's Month? So that's just something to kind of think about. We'll talk about it for just a second, then I'll hand it over to Jen. If you want to just think about it, or even carry on the discussion after the program, you certainly can. We'd also love to hear from you in the chat. Why do we observe International Women's Day? The first International Women's Day was observed in 1911, so 110 years ago. The historical and political origins of this particular holiday are really fascinating, definitely worth a deep dive after this program. I just want to be sure to acknowledge that International Women's Day is a day for celebrating the achievements of women all over the world, and it's also a day of action. The International Women's Day theme for 2021 is Choose to Challenge. And I hope that as we celebrate, we will also take this time to sharpen our awareness of women's issues. As Jen will be discussing in her presentation, the world has changed a lot for women in the last 110 years, but there's still work to do for a more gender equitable world, especially for women and girls who are also contending with discrimination on the basis of their race, of their nationality, their orientation, their gender expression, age, socioeconomic status, their ability, and especially for those in STEM fields. I hope that after this program, you might explore some of the resources offered on the International Women's Day website to keep this conversation going. And we're also going to have a bunch of other resources from Jen in a little while. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of with that meditation, we'll hand the floor over to Jen, and I will call up those slides.
Terrific. Terrific. I think we're going to get to some of those reasons today, and I hope that we inspire you to think about even more of those reasons. We'll go to the top of the presentation, and we'll take this. If you can go to the top of the presentation, please. Perfect. And then we'll take the next slide. We're going to start in a place, that we know, right? We're going to start where we are, and that is, what do we know about STEM today? And so I wanted to just call out a few things that I usually set up and talk about as we think about what we know to be true about equity and STEM today. We know that we have organizations like Life and Science in Durham and like the National Science and Math and Science Initiative that are addressing equity inside and outside of formal education. So out of school time actually makes up just as much of the day as formal school time. So we need to leverage both of those to really energize girls and make them feel welcome and included in the STEM workforce, and even in STEM classes, which we'll be talking about a lot today. One of the things that I truly believe to my core is that, solving life's grand challenges really hinges on making sure everyone's voice is included. And so one of the great parts of embracing diversity is that when we hear other voices, we have more ways to solve problems, we have more lenses to look at problems, and I think we have more paths forward. That leads to a vibrance that could be seen economically, a vibrance that could be seen personally, intellectually, etc. So I believe that so much to my core, and I think that that's why this has been a lifelong passion to me. We know that there are so many vastly cool careers that STEM can provide us. But we also know, and I want to underscore this point, that there are jobs that we can't even imagine that will use STEM skills in the 21st century. And so we have to really think about how we position kids today, whether we are working in the formal school environment or the informal school environment. How can we position every child for success, and what is it about working with girls in STEM that we can do better? And one of the mantras that we really buy into really comes from the Gina Davis Media Institute, as well as it's a mantra of the If Then collection and If Then work from Light of Hill Philanthropies, is if you can see it, you can be it, right? We want to think about ourselves in roles, and it's much easier if we see a face that looks similar to ours. If you heard my talk last year at the Museum of Life and Science, I talked a little bit about the Scully Effect. And for women that are currently in science fields today, the Gina Davis Media Institute put out a study called the Scully Effect. And so those of you who don't know Gillian Anderson just as Margaret Thatcher, but know her as Dana Scully from the X-Files, know that would I don't think find it unimaginable to know that people cite her, women cite her almost 3/4 of the time that are in science today about her influencing their career. And so it's really enormous that we now have television shows and we now have other kinds of media that are completely focused on women in those roles. So, and just a little bit about what we know today. We can go on to our next slide. We also happen to know that a couple of things are true, and we'll outline them in that sort of K-12 pathway. That girls' self-esteem will likely peak at age 9. And so that is something where girls work up and believe in themselves in ways that that we see working upward until they reach that tween point where their confidence begins to diminish. And so we have a lot of work to do there. We also know that there is inequity in the workforce, which is equitably male and female, or slightly a little bit more female. However, when we look at females in particular domains of science, technology, engineering, and math, you'll see 13% of the women are 13% of engineers are women, and 26% are computer scientists. With the Society of Women Engineers, which is the citation here, is a fantastic organization to look to for not only statistics but for an enormous amount of resources. I also want to highlight a study about how young this happens. So one of the most, I think, heartfelt studies that I've ever read in my time thinking about gender equity has been around girls in kindergarten. And it turns out that girls in kindergarten are extra sensitive to the math anxieties that their teachers hold. And they carry that anxiety with them, but boys don't. And so even in our youngest ages, girls sense that there is a chasm, is an anxiousness, a stress, a chasm for them to overcome if they are to embrace many of the topics that we love so much under the umbrella of STEM. So a little bit about that reality, and then the next slide illustrates, again, a little bit more of our reality as it pertains to race. And so race and socioeconomic status. So the Girl Effect is, or the Girls Index, which came out in 2018, illustrates here in this graph and in many ways, and I think we see this with the Black Lives Matter movement as well, how much inequity there is around race in particular careers, and how much inequity is also systemically happening with those who live in higher poverty situations. So you can see from this graph here that we have Hispanic girls believe half of as many Hispanic girls believe that they're good at STEM subjects as white girls. And so that intersectionality between race and gender is a huge, huge other place where we need to look to and work toward a greater degree of equity. As you can see here as well, high poverty schools, many of those, 10% less of those students are likely to see themselves as being good and being able to move into a STEM career. And so let's take a look at the next slide, if I could, please. And think about what are the strategies, right? So if we have this reality, what should our strategies be? And for those of you who are in the field that are joining us today, we're going to talk about a couple of terms, some that you are probably very familiar with, and one that has become, I think, an overarching reality in the last 5 or 6 years of the way we think about embracing equity. And that is the STEM mindset, right? That is really having a STEM identity, if you will. The identity politics of thinking that you are good enough to be in a STEM career and that you have the skills and the passion and the wisdom to do that is something that has to be held from within. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the levers for change that help make that STEM identity more likely to show up. The allies in this work are SciGirls. SciGirls is a PBS television show, as well as a website and a set of national training constructs around STEM and girls. And so full disclosure, I've been a national advisor to them, both on the television show and the research that they've conducted around the strategies that they share so that we can be aligned in our trainings around how we can embrace equitable practices. And so in the case of Sci Girls, they just had a second update. It came out in 2019. And that second update is a meta-analysis of all the research that has gone on about gender and STEM. And these 6 things are the 6 most important factors or 6 pathways to really working on and helping a girl feel like she can identify as a STEM kid. And so one of the things that we've known for quite some time is that STEM and real life is a very, very important factor. We want to draw the parallels between how science, technology, engineering, math, all of it feels real to us and feels real in our life today. And I think that we have to look no further than the pandemic to exactly see how science impacts and has impacted all of our lives. And so the reality is that our kids are growing up in a time when science has profoundly changed their life for the last year. The STEM mentality has a lot to do with things, the ways in which, the pedagogy in which we as educators, whether we're outside of school, again, in a museum setting or Boys and Girls Club or Girl Scouts, et cetera, or inside the formal education system, we do things hands-on, minds-on, right? And we're constantly about skill development. And the STEM mentality is about obtaining all those things, right? It's obtaining all those skills and a way of imagining your work and your solutions in a scientific way. And that's basically how all programs are built right now, which is exciting. That's where we've come to as a whole education industry. I want to talk though a little bit about STEM agency, and I'm going to talk about this through the remainder of the talk. I was very, very moved by a talk in mid-2020 about not only STEM identity, but STEM agency. I'm going to share with you how I define STEM agency. This isn't how all researchers define it. But for me, it is the alchemy of the belief and the confidence and the resilience and the growth that science can have in your life. And so for me, what's interesting about that alchemy and that agency is that it's unique to each and every girl, and how they find that agency has a lot to do with who's around them and what opportunities are put in front of them, and how they see themselves. But I think this particularly, and for me, underscores some of the other pieces of educational theory that we embrace today, including the growth mindset, right? And including the sense of grit and resilience that we so hear about as being an important pathway to success for 21st century learners. So just know that those are woven in, I think, in this greater conversation about STEM. The STEMinist voice is one that I will talk about. Again, we're talking today on International Women's Day about advocacy. And advocacy is about who is doing STEM, who can be doing STEM, and rejecting the stereotypes and advocating for a different place for women in this world. And what's so important, I think, about this, and I can tell you story after story, but a short story of my daughter is just the conversation that we have. The conversation when she was 6 years old and she was the only girl in Lego class, or when she went and looked at her 7th grade class in robotics and said, I wish there were more girls there, and there were 2 out of a class of 15. Talking about and addressing those things and being an advocate, not only for your own child, but for other children and other girls, is a really big part of sharing our voice and sharing the reasons why I talked about at the top of this broadcast that are so critical to the way in which we advocate and share our voice and lift up other voices. Social STEM, I think, is, again, a point you're going to hear me talk about quite a bit, but as is necessary. Our world is collaborative, and so is STEM. And the more that I think girls see STEM as being a way of changing the world, that lever to change the world, And doing so in a social construct is really important to them. And this is a deeply held belief that I've had for many, many years. And we see a very simple example of this. A simple example is, how many women doctors are there today, right? Women's constructs and systemic biases are about helping. And so the STEM field that women have been embraced in the most is to become a doctor. And so we see actually more women right now entering medical school than even men. But when you talk about engineering, when you talk about computer science, you don't see those kinds of numbers until you go into society, into like the Society of Women Engineers or Engineers Without Borders, particularly, which has way more women in STEM involved in them, because those agencies go out and serve the world, and they do something altruistic by using those STEM skills to do for others. And so that construct has really shaped, I think, which careers have advanced more quickly for women in STEM. And finally, and you know this to be true because there are so many opportunities for you to connect to mentors, whether it's Million Girls Mentors, Fab Fens, any number of mentoring programs, including the If Then collection from Lyda Hill Philanthropies. We have to see role models and mentors. And those role models and mentors are there to interact, to interview. I used to have, and we can go to the next slide, a podcast, right? And this whole entire podcast was about, was absolutely about young girls talking to women in professions and asking them and interviewing them and being a journalist and being a podcaster. And so I never, ever I always tell parents to never hesitate. If they see a woman that's a scientist and they think that their daughter is interested in becoming something like that, take their card and call them up. It's very unusual that they would turn you down and say, oh no, I don't want to talk to your daughter about what I love doing every day. These are people who are there for you. And then what we're going to talk about a little bit later is how to take those mentorships into action. So when we see girls, we still see gaps at particular places along the pipeline into a STEM career. And so I just want to underscore that here, that there are moments of doubt all along the way for girls. And we said that, again, a girl's confidence will peak at age 9. Teenage girls' confidence can go down, but then by the time we're in high school, I find this just an extraordinary statistic that 50% of high school girls are considering a career, and only 6.7% of them go into a career in a STEM field. And so that disparity is just, why is that there? Why is it so enormous? And I just want to point out, if you are a parent, I have just been reading over a project and a report and a parent guide from the Colorado Women's Foundation, which is called This Is What STEM Looks Like. And I love how they have illustrated over time, over different age groups, exactly how to really encourage girls and eliminate some of those moments of doubt. So I would highly recommend that you check that out. The next slide, please, Peregrine. One of the things that I just wanted to share with you as I was reflecting on this talk, a piece of what I could give over, the work that I've done, is literally, does not matter if you have interacted with me or with girls programs that are like programs that I've done. So CLICK was, we refer to it as the spy school for girls. It was a middle school camp using augmented reality in Pittsburgh in the mid-2000s, the mid-aughts. Whether you know that program or other programs that were associated with the Carnegie Science Center and the Girls Math and Science Partnership at that time, that program and those sets of programs really taught me something about the way girls interacted. I came into an industry and came into the informal science education industry, really puzzled as a scientist myself, why people didn't think science was cool. And for a long, long time, I worked hard at making sure that we had public spaces and places to embrace science as super cool. And I think that there's so many more people that do that now, but it's because girls have found their tribe, right? They have programs like this, whether it's Brain Cake online or whether it's Sci Girls in the TV show and they can see themselves, or Mission Impossible today, or the If Then collection, or a program that I worked on last summer and invented for girls during COVID, where we literally had a camp that was all about following your personal passions and finding the place for you in science, even if you don't think it exists yet, to take your passion and let that drive the way. I think that we just don't talk enough about peer groups. I don't think we're talking enough about what it is that socializes and norms girls into the belief, not only that they can do and be, but that they will do and be great scientists and be successful in changing the world. Peregrine and I in our prep work had focused on certain milestones that we have in our life. We just witnessed a fellow North Carolinian as she and two other women were the first set of women to execute a spacewalk entirely in the spacewalk that NASA had that was entirely run by women, which is so amazing. To see two women spacewalkers and another person inside that spaceship and fixing the International Space Station, that is a remarkable moment, and we should celebrate that moment. But our equity will come when that is as unique as having co-ed missions, as having all men missions. Calling it out gives us a line in the sand to point to and celebrate, but we need to continue to work so that it's normalized, that we see those types of firsts happening every day. I'll take the next slide, please. So when we're doing the hard work, I think now, I think we've built up momentum. I think we've built up a great deal of momentum around making people feel that STEM is something real in their life. It's important. It's going to lead to a career that's meaningful and can change the world. I think it's particularly in the places of advocacy and action that we need to be more aggressive with our work. I think the advocacy is, as I mentioned before, as granular as talking with your kids about their experience and why it isn't equitable sometimes, or when it is, to call it out. But also, I think it is about giving agency, giving that ability of kids to pursue not just their identity, not just their STEM identity, but actually make it theirs. The biggest, I think, part of leading Bright at summer camp last year for me was to put in front of girls women that were neuroscientists because they fell into it because they were musicians and they wanted to understand how the brain worked around music. Or that there were women who were microbiologists who were also artists and created dresses that embodied their entire PhD thesis so they could explain it better. Women are dynamic, multifaceted people, and our agency comes from writing this script. And we have a script to write. We know that STEM is going to give us the careers that we can't yet imagine, but we've got to write a script to get there. And we need to empower our girls, whether they want to be on the top of a volcano and taking samples, or whether they want to be discovering new chemistry revolutions, or winning a Nobel Prize. We have to let them have agency over what STEM is to them and combining all their passions. We aren't in a zero-sum game here. STEM is a part of all that we are. So you don't lose anything or have to give up anything by having agency in STEM. And again, I would just point out that this collaborative, altruistic part of science is critical. When we see, one of the things that we found in our summer camp last year that was remarkable was there were about 200 girls in the program. By the end of the 3 weeks, there were thousands of interactions between them. They were craving the interactions, and they were given an opportunity to continue to, we hear a lot about microaggression, but micro-affirm each other in their STEM work. And that's what we saw as being so powerful, is that other girls were seeing them for who they were, and they were embracing them for who they were. And it was those interstitial conversations, girl to girl, that I think develops the deeper affinity, the deeper identity, and of course, the deeper agency. Next slide. So my provocation to you is, where do these affinities become action, right, in your life, in the places that you control? That might be at a school that you teach at. It might be at a museum that you run. It might be at a program that you do after school with your own child. Where are those action points? And let's start taking action. It isn't just about liking. It isn't just about being part of a science class. It is about taking action. And that means that when you do call up that mentor, that you have conversations, that you meet them, or that turns into an internship, an apprenticeship. How are we here for girls to have a true and abiding through line, a pathway to their STEM careers through interactions with others and through a system that will set them up for success? So I want you to think about how you and how the work that you do can set up girls for success. I'll take the next slide. I wanted to, before we start questions, I just wanted to give a shout out again to the organizations that make this possible. It's amazing to be on 3 platforms at once, in 3 ecosystems at once. First, in the museum ecosystem with the Museum of Life and Science in Durham. Secondly, on the platform of the National Girls Collaborative Project, which is a gigantic juggernaut for girls and their education, but also has the Connectory, which is the largest repository of where to find STEM organizations, whether you're a boy or a girl. And so they are absolutely critical in the work that they do out of school time too. And thanks to the National Math and Science Initiative, not only because they're my awesome employer, but because they're making systemic change in schools by walking the walk inside schools around culturally responsive practices. And it's just an enormous, enormous lift that we all have to do. And it takes these kinds of partners to do it. So I wanted to thank everyone out there that's watching from those lenses. I'm glad that you're here in this moment together. And I hope that if you're deciding to make a donation on behalf of a girl or a person that's important to you today, you'll think of these organizations first, because we have to fuel this impact, fuel this passion, and continue to do this work. I can tell you from those of my colleagues who have been doing this for 25 or 30 years, we are really excited about where we see ourselves, and we also see a very, very bright future. So just thanks and a shout out to everyone that's made this possible. And also, again, thank you, Peregrine. I can't wait to have questions.
Jen, thank you so much for that. That is so wonderful. First, I wanted to go ahead and make sure that I had a few links in the chat to some of the sites we were talking about. First of these being your website and the International Women's Day websites. And then we had a couple other really good resources that I so appreciated you collecting for us, Jen. And I'm going to put those in the chat as well, just for reference. So they're up there for plenty of time. Because we're going to spend
Fantastic.
Yeah, perfect. So we're going to spend the next kind of 10 minutes or so. I'd love to hear from all of you who are watching. What are you thinking? What questions do you have for Jen? Go ahead and you can let us know in the chat. We'll be able to read that and share it with Jen and have her respond. I think while we're waiting for some of those questions, I would love to ask you a question, Jen, because I really loved this part of your presentation and of what we've talked about before. I love the emphasis on encouraging girls to develop their agency. And we talked about how agency comes with risks as well as rewards. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how we can support girls who will inevitably have to experience failure, because that's a vital part of the scientific process.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's a couple things to unpack with that, right? First of all, failure in girls and failure in boys just looks very different. So we need to acknowledge that. If I had $1 for every time that I had judged a science fair and asked a boy, hey, where did failure get you? And he went on and on and on about where it got him in the process of thinking through. Whereas a girl will resort to saying, oh, no, I had an outcome. That's what I expected, right? The ability to fail forward, the ability to have a growth mindset and fail forward and fail quickly is so inherent to the scientific process, because failure is really a win, right? We just don't couch it like that. What we see when, like, I can tell you, like, oh, I'm having flashbacks from my master's program, so many failures in the data, right? But they led to the next step. And if there was knowledge in that failure, there was the win of more knowledge in that failure. And so part of what we need to embrace is this has just been the language that we've used around our house from the very beginning. Like, we just laugh and say, wow, that was an epic fail. We embrace and we talk and we use the language of failure as a way of really constructing that and making it okay to fail. And this is where I've seen, again, the boys will talk about it as if it does not affect their entire identity at all. There's no impetus on them, like, oh gosh, you failed in your experiment. No big deal. But girls just internalize that in a different way. And they feel that there's something wrong about failing. And failing is really a win in so many cases, right? Especially if a failure, winning is a win when you know that you've grown, right? From something that you've learned, whether you failed or not. So I think it's really important to reframe the language. There's that. The other piece of that, and I'll just answer this quickly, is you had asked a little bit about risk and reward. And I love the concept of risk and reward, because I think that it's really cool to highlight women scientists who do really risky things. And we had a part of that was in our summer camp last year, and we actually had a grid where the girls actually positioned, whether a storm chaser was more risky than an engineer or someone that took samples of a volcano or studied and went into a cave to discover a new species. The idea is that it's all risky, right? It's all risky. There is sometimes physical risk, right? But the idea of a girl being a scientist, if you look at that data that I showed you, it's got to be risky. It's got to have there's got to be some downside, or else girls wouldn't think that it wasn't for them. And I have had 10th grade girls, sixth grade girls saying, oh, girls failed, they were failing tests intentionally, not to look smart. I've had 10th grade girls saying, I think it's too late for me. I don't think I can get into STEM in the 10th grade. I say those stories because every moment is an opportunity to reframe that for a girl. If you're working with a girl, you can reframe that risk and reward conversation, and there's so many opportunities for it.
We always like to say in different kinds of our virtual programs that everything is data, even and especially failures.
Yes.
Yes. I really appreciate that insight, especially kind of the anecdote about science fairs. I know I wanted to kind of actually pick up on something you just mentioned, which is about there being no time frame on your trajectory for science. And that was something that I love that you said. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that. I think there's this maybe sense of urgency that women and girls especially are picking up on. And what is, yeah, tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah, so I think that in that, I think that there's two things that I would underscore there. One is that, and this is personal, right? This is me personally saying, I tend to think about my daughter and think about her trajectory, right? And think about, you know, the fact that if she's like every other child out there, and then she'll go to college, she'll change. And that there may be an urgency on our part as people who do this work and want to help create change. But I think that our kids are changing too, and they're changing their framework, and they're changing, and they have multiple options or multiple times where they can do that on a continuum. So I was super surprised to hear a 10th grader frame their world as, oh, is it too late for me? Is it too late for me to get involved in this? And the answer is no. And so that's what's so brilliant about entry points, right? When we're providing these entry points, they could be at any time. They might even be for someone who never thought that STEM was for them, but now they're 25 and they want to come back and upskill in some different way, or they've seen something different in their life. I think it's amazing. I mean, just amazing. I met a woman last year who she's a musician, and she was ready to graduate and become a professional musician. And then she learned that she had synesthesia. And synesthesia is a blending of our senses. And so she found out that her way of thinking was unique, and she stopped in her senior year after she was just credits away from graduating and became a neuroscientist. That's remarkable. Those pivot points could happen at any time. So to your point, right, we that are in an industry that is meant to support should be having the opportunity and making places to support women along that trajectory, no matter how old they are.
I think you've really, you've addressed pretty well. One of the questions we actually just got in the chat, which is any recommendations or resources for women getting to STEM later in life? And then we have one other really good one, but I thought maybe you could address this one.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome question. In the blog, we'll make sure that my blog is connected to this chat so that you can read, because there's lists of resources. I mean, they're like literally lists of resources. And sometimes those, I have visuals of those resources. I think I'll put up a Great Girls Media piece today. So this is all about when girls can see themselves in the media. I'll put that up on social media today. But when you're talking about later in life, I think that is incredible, because again, the things that we're talking about when we talk about fail forward culture, things like that, when you grow up, when you become more mature, I think that you sense more of what your greatest strengths and weaknesses are. And when you know that, right, then you can direct that. You can direct that to the kind of science that you might want. We have all kinds of colleges that are embracing people of all ages. But I can also tell you that there's places like, Skillshare, IDEO, put online universities, open-ended courses. We have never had education as democratized as it is today. There are classes at Harvard that you can take. It's an amazing opportunity for us to continue to learn as people and to continue to make a contribution. So I would look both at the blog, but also just think about those places where it's just about learning more. And then you're going to find your place when you've got that learning more construct or that learning more platform, then you're going to find more science in there too.
What a great point too. I just wanted to, you've just said it, but I wanted to amplify it just about how, especially for those who are kind of looking at a STEM career or a STEM field later in life, knowing themselves better, almost kind of, having a better sense of their own agency and identity. In this case, their own STEM identity is what helps propel them forward. As a student who was a non-traditional student and ended up going back to school to finish my degree, I definitely found that to be the case.
I love that question. What a great question.
And then I had, there's two more that I think we may be able to kind of put together here at the very end. We have a really great question, which is, how can I uplift girls who want to get into STEM if I am not a parent? And then we have one other question that is, what are some ways we can encourage intersectionality into STEM from the outside? So both of these kind of say, what else can I do, especially if in some cases you're not a parent?
Yeah. Okay. So in the first case, what I would do is I would align. I don't think that you need to align yourself with an organization that means something to you, right? I was talking about Engineers Without Borders, right? You can make a difference in showing people what you're capable of, or what you'd like to do, or how you can behave by those affinity organizations. So what I would do is I would seek out those affinity organizations that have kids in them. So seek out the Girl Scouts, the Boys and Girls Clubs, the Jack and Jills, those places in your museums. If you don't have kids, you can still make a huge impact by volunteering at a museum. There's nothing like picking up an artifact or having a kid bring something to you that they found and then validating that curiosity. So I would look for the places, and I would look for the organizations that serve kids, and you can be a volunteer there or help in some way, or leverage your own gifts. The second piece about intersectionality is really about what I will offer today about intersectionality is the realization of this, right? So that we have to recognize that identifying as a woman is not the only place where our identity forms. Our race, our backgrounds have a huge input on who we are. And this was no more meaningful to me when I was at the If Then Summit, the very first time that the 125 If Then ambassadors met. And it was not the reception day, it was a work day, right? And there were all of these women who were mathematicians, and they were Black. And they immediately said, we're going to do Boomerang. Every woman that's involved in math, that's African-American, come over here. And this gigantic group of women, the most African-American women mathematicians I've ever seen, right? Which is like 20 at a time. I'm like, this is amazing. They're all there cheering each other on in ways that was so meaningful to me just to witness it. So we can't, we have to continue to foster not only groups of women, but go across those intersections of race and class and ability, and really think about who we welcome into this fold, because it is so beautiful. It is so rich. It is so wonderful to see all of those identities come to bear on this amazing, amazing challenge that we have called, life, which I think has so many great STEM challenges for us. That was a very motivating moment for me, and I hope it inspires others.
It sounds like, yeah, community building is such an important thing inside of STEM, but also outside of STEM, because our communities encompass so many more places than just our professions. And it may be that we can align with people on different axes of our identity.
Yes.
So that's a really great message. And also I really, and I appreciate, maybe we can go out in this sentiment, that joy is a really important part of this process. There's things that we can look back on and celebrate. There's milestones that we can take heart in and we can appreciate. There's women who we can uplift and girls who we can uplift. And we can still acknowledge that there's a long way to go, but we can't go that distance without feeling triumphs. And it's the same with the scientific process, and it's the same with learning, where our brains are kind of wired to take risks when there are adequate rewards. So making those rewards feel rich, maybe making that community feel rich, and that joy feel rich enough to see us into paving the way for the future.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think today is a celebration for sure. And I think that recognizing others' joy as well is another way to celebrate it, being a witness to joy. That, you know, I just witnessed to a friend of mine getting her PhD that last weekend. It was just amazing. And so, you know, we have to take these moments of joy, because there are many moments that are difficult. There are many moments where girls, where I've been in situations, again, in the climate of being in a system that's so embracing, and girls still saying, I doubt myself. I don't have enough content. You know, I'm not built for this. I can't do this. I'm not right for this. There are many times that we have that. So let's instead take the time for joy today and celebrate where we are and celebrate where we can be.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful sentiment. Thank you for sharing in my joy and talking about all of this today. And thank you to all of our viewers for your amazing questions, for coming and celebrating with us today. Again, Jen, I so appreciate you being here. I'm going to throw a link in the chat to the blog that you mentioned, which is on your website. So you're going to kind of be, you know, publishing almost like a retrospective for the day, and maybe even mentioning some of the things that we touched on. So that's a great place to kind of follow up. And we have some other links about the different organizations you mentioned today in your presentation. And there's great places to find you as well. If people want to follow up with you, they can do so through your website.
Absolutely. And I hope that you know, by looking through that blog, you'll see actually, and it'll look just like the presentations. It's the same visual of the presentation that I used today. So you'll see that as you track down in the blog, there are literally links to 40, 50 resources there, whether they be TV shows or games or curricula, anything like that. So it's a nice resource there that's already been put together. But I appreciate you so much, and this has been such a privilege.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all so much. And I hope you have a happy remainder of your International Women's Day. Thanks so much, friends. We're going to go ahead and wave goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later. Thank you so much, friends.